this video, I'm going to install this low center of gravity chassis onto my Traxxas Slash. Let's get started. Alright, the first thing I'm going to do is take the body off and the wheels off to make it a little easier to work on. Alright, so I opened up the package and this is everything that it comes with. It comes with the chassis, bulkheads, Nerf bars, motor mount, battery tray, receiver box, and some various linkages, extra screws, and instructions to put everything together. So, looks like I'm going to go ahead and start with the front. Let me change the camera view and let's get started. Alright, to remove the front end from the high center of gravity chassis, there's going to be 4 screws holding on the front, located here and over here. And then we also need to disconnect the steering linkage, and we're going to disconnect it from the bell crank over here. Make sure to hold on to the screws because we might need them when we reinstall the new low center gravity chassis. All right, with those screws out, we can just gently pull forward and the whole assembly comes off like that. I can set the main chassis aside, get bag D ready, and we can start disassembling the front to put on the new piece. All right, to disassemble the front and add in the new piece, we need to take out the 2 screws here, and then these 5 screws there. All right, now we can slide off the front bumper. Next, we have to uninstall this screw here so we can take off this piece, and then we can reinstall the new one. Remove the hinge pins. Now the last thing we're going to do is we're going to take off the bell crank steering assembly. There's 2 screws here. Remember to keep the washers and everything else together. See, there's a washer right there. Oh, there it is. So make sure not to lose that washer. You can take the bottom piece off. You should be able to take off the steering. Could use a flathead screwdriver to pop it off a little easier. And there you go. I'm actually upgrading my steering linkages, so I won't be needing the bearings or anything like that because I've got spare ones. Alright, so I'm gonna go ahead and install my new bell crank linkages and servo saver, and then we'll continue. Put a link in the description below if you want to upgrade your steering. I noticed that my steering was pretty sloppy, so I decided to upgrade and put in a stronger servo. Just adjusting it to be a little stronger than the stock one, since I'll be upgrading the servo. Alright. Since I'm screwing into aluminum, I'm going to add in a little drop of blue Loctite so it doesn't back out. And I'm not going to use the electric screwdriver to drive it in fears of stripping out the threads. I'm just going to snug it up and move on to the next side. Same thing, I'm going to use some blue Loctite so the screw doesn't back out. Alright, we're going to install this centerpiece. And again, I'm going to use some blue Loctite just so it doesn't back out on me. I'm just going to tighten it a little bit, make sure it moves freely, and move on to the next one. Same thing on the other side, blue Loctite. All right, it moves freely. So now we can actually install the new piece, which is in bag B. Be careful because bag B does come with some screws, and we'll probably be needing those since they might be longer than the screws we took out for the body. So first what we're going to do is install the diff into the new piece. And then install the hinge pins so that the control arms are secured. Now I can install this piece to secure the hinge pins to the diff housing. We're going into plastic, so you don't need to tighten it down too hard. Just snug it up and you're good to go. I can install the bearings for the steering. There's a bearing on the bottom and a bearing on top. Then you install the washer and the screw. All right, so it looks like we can't install the bell crank on because of this centerpiece. So I'm gonna unscrew one side and hopefully I can feed it in without having to disassemble more. There's one side. Looks like I'm gonna have to unscrew both sides to make this work. Feed it underneath, line it up, and then I'm gonna re-lock tight. Okay. Install the top two bearings and install the washer and the screw. I'm going into plastic, so I'm not going to install or use blue Loctite on this. Since it's new plastic that hasn't been threaded before, you might have a little bit of trouble starting the screw. Just apply a little bit of pressure and it will catch. And again, you don't want to crank down on it because you're going into plastic. You just want to screw it down until it shoulders up and it's good to go. All right. Now we can add the front bumper. Install the two long screws that came out of here. I'm not going all the way down because I'm afraid I'm going to strip the plastic, so I'll leave a little bit of space and I'll go back and tighten it by hand. Move to the bottom side. You're going to have the countersunk screws that you took out. You're going to reinstall those. Again, I'm going to use the electric screwdriver to get it partially in, and then I'll come back and tighten it by hand. All right, now the front end is done, we can move on to the rear. All right, to take off the rear, there's 4 screws that you got to take out. They're located here, and on the bottom side, here and here. Now you can gently pull back and it should come off. There you go. Now I'm going to take off my center diff, or if you have slipper clutch, you can take that out because we're going to use it when we install. There you go. Set that aside. Set aside your center drive shaft for when we reinstall it. All right, now it looks like we need bag C. And bag C is the bottom portion of the diff housing. So, and be careful when you open up the bag because there are some screws. I believe they're longer than the ones that came out off the truck. And these are going to be used to reinstall the rear end to the chassis. So in order to get the bottom piece off, we're going to take off these two screws here, this screw, and then the 4 screws on the bottom. And then we should be able to take the bottom piece off and swap it out for the new one. All right, let's start off by taking these 2 top screws off. Looks like mine wants to hang up on the sway bar, so I'm going to disconnect the sway bar. Just unscrew those off just a tad. There we go. Set aside the rear bumper because we're going to use that later. And now what we're going to do is we're going to remove the hinge pins. And after removing the hinge pins, you should be able to take the bottom piece off. Just pops right off. There we go. So now with the new piece, we're going to reinstall. This is the back, so we're going to line it up with that hole. And there you go. Now we can reinstall the hinge pins. Install this piece, make sure the notches are facing down. I'm going to install 2 of these screws on the bottom that are here and here. Remember, when I'm going into plastic, I'm not going all the way down with the screw. I'm gonna go back and tighten it up later. Now we can reinstall the rear bumper. I'm going to install this screw first. Put my sway bar in place, and then the last 2 screws. Alright, I'm going to tighten down the screws that hold down the sway bar. Remember, you don't want to tighten it down all the way where it pinches the sway bar, because that's going to prevent it from actually rotating. So you want to make sure you screw it down evenly on both sides, and then you want to make sure that it can move side to side. Let's take a look at that. So it can move side to side so it can rotate freely when it's actually doing its job. All right, now the rear end is done. We can start taking the electronics off the main chassis and prep the new chassis. All right, first thing I'm gonna do is undo the receiver box, so that way I have access to all the wires. All right, now I can unhook the receiver. Okay. Now we can undo the servo. And remove the servo now. And set that aside. Next, we can unplug the ESC from the actual motor. Set that aside. Now we can move on to the motor. And undo this wire hold down. I'm going to take the heatsink off so I can have better access. There it is. So unfortunately you can't reuse the motor mount from the high center of gravity chassis to the, because the new low center of gravity chassis has a different design. I have an upgraded one which is aluminum, so it's unfortunate I can't reuse this. That's a one big pitfall of the low center of gravity chassis, because you're gonna have to re-upgrade that if you have one already. All right, now we can set this aside and bring in the new chassis. All right, so we're gonna install the Nerf bars first, and it has some provided screws in a bag, and those are for the Nerf bars. Let's open that up. All right, to install the Nerf bar is pretty easy. You just basically line up the Nerf bar and then push up, and they snap into place. Here's a bottom view. Oops. There you go. Now install the screws. And now install the screws in these locations. And then the same on the other side. All right, the Nerf bars are on. Let's see about installing the electronics. All right, we're gonna move on to bag D, which is the motor mount, and where we can mount the motor to the plate. There are screws included and also a nut, so just be aware of that so you don't lose those. The nut goes into this hole, and you want to face like that. So you can get that to focus. There you go. It doesn't come with the bearing, so you're gonna have to reinstall it from your old truck. Drops in and has 4 provided screws, so we can use those to install. All right, let me install the bearing. Bearings installed. All right, let's install the battery tray, which is bag E. There's provided screws, so be sure not to lose those. Looks like you got 2 long screws and 2 short screws. So you're gonna use the long screws on this piece, which attaches back here by the motor mount. Just sits in the channels there, and then from the bottom you can install the long screws. Move on to the second piece, right here. And it looks like that's just gonna install right into the notch. That's a little cutout for it. There we go. And then use the 2 shorter screws, and you can install from the bottom. There's a battery strap. Nice. There's included foam, so you can line your battery channel accordingly to the size battery pack that you have. So I'm going to hold on to these and put them in later once I have everything put together. Now let's install the servo. This is a servo I got off of Amazon. I'll put in the link in the description below. So to install the servo, you actually have to do it from the outside of the chassis. There's a cutout right here for the servo, so you're gonna feed the wires through. It's gonna sit like that. I can install the screws. Okay. Now we can install the included servo horn and linkages for the steering. Alright, the linkages and everything are in bag F. Alright, so the linkages came with 3 screws. You're going to use the short screw with the servo horn and the 2 longer screws for the actual linkage itself. So for now, I'm just going to install the linkage kind of pointing upward, and I'll eventually adjust that once I'll adjust that once I actually have the servo plugged in and powered on, so I can get everything centered. Eventually I'll add a little bit of Loctite on the screws so it doesn't back out. And this linkage installs in this orientation. This other linkage will install on the bell crank. All right, now let's take off the old motor plate. Just gotta take off these 2 screws and we can install the new one. It didn't come with new screws, so you have to reuse your old ones. It's countersunk on these holes, so you have to install it like so. It looks like it's going to go in a slightly different orientation to have the wires pointed away. Before, the orientation was like this. Let me put this back. It was like this. So now we have to use the 2 holes that are in the opposite locations. It's like that. I'm gonna add a little bit of blue Loctite because I don't want this to back off. It was a little loose when I took it off. Alright, there we go. Now we can install the motor. So insert the notch into this little screw over here and it'll hold it in place. And for now, we can install the screw into the lock nut that we placed in there earlier. And this will just kind of hold it in place for now until we can get the rear end on and we can set our mesh. All right, let's go ahead and install the rear end and the center diff or your slipper clutch, and we can set our mesh. So first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna install my center differential. All right, now we can set our mesh and tighten down the motor mount. I like to tighten it up just a bit, but allows me to move it and set my mesh. And you don't want to. You want to leave a little bit of space. It's kind of hard to see in there, but you see, it's about where I like it for my mesh. Have a little bit of wiggle room. I'm gonna go ahead and tighten it down. All right, and check the mesh, make sure it didn't move. Looks just about perfect for me, so I'm gonna continue. All right, I'm gonna install the rear end now. Try to see the orientation of the flats and the orientation of where the flat is in your differential. See if I can get it in the view. There you go. Try to line those up. Looks like my flat in the differential is it's horizontal. So I'm gonna make sure my flat's over here or horizontal. And I'm gonna put them together. So to install the back half, you just line it up and push it together. You might need to wiggle your center diff a little bit or your clutch a little bit just to get it to line up. And looks like we're in the right position, so we can install the screws. Remember, they came with screws, so you can use new ones. The rear end is on. I can move on to the front. Alright, the servo's installed, and it looks like my neutral position or center position for my servo is going to be about this angle right here. So keep that in mind when you install your servo horn. Alright, when you install the front end, there's a little notch right here where you have to install the front, so make sure you line that up first before you install the screws, because otherwise it's going to have little tabs sticking out. I'm going to install my center shaft since I don't have it in yet. Now I can install the front end. There's that tab I just mentioned. There's that center tab I was mentioning. Just gotta get that in there. Make sure your center drive shaft is on the spline. Looks like we're good. Now I can install with the new screws. I went 2 short screws and 2 long screws. The short screws are gonna go in the chassis over here, and the long screws are gonna go in these holes over here. Now let's install the steering linkage onto the belt crank. Yours will most likely be made out of plastic, so you don't need to add any Loctite, but since I have an aluminum belt crank, I'm gonna go ahead and add a little dab of blue Loctite so it doesn't back out. All right, steering is buttoned up, front end is done. Now we can go install the receiver box and the electronics. All right, now let's install the receiver box, which is in bag G. All right, bag G comes with a few different pieces and even some silicone grease. And it comes with new hardware as well, so make sure not to lose any of those screws. Comes with a little gasket as well. The instructions are kind of bad in the sense that it doesn't really show where to install the receiver box, but I believe it's gonna go right here. The holes line up. So you use the 2 short screws that are countersunk to install the bottom of the receiver box. the gasket on. Now you can start feeding through your cables. Let's go ahead and install the ESC. Just gonna go right next to the receiver box, in between the motor and the receiver box. I can feed these wires in as well. And since I have a motor fan unit, I'm gonna feed the wire in for that as well. Now I can install everything into my ESC. Remember, channel 1 is steering, channel 2 is going to be your ESC, or your throttle. And make sure the gasket, before you install the gasket, you can put a little bit of silicone grease. So that way it's going to be lubed up and will make that receiver box a little bit waterproof. Use a provided lube, just put a little bit. And just lube up the seal. Put it into the groove. Make sure it sits. All right. And you can install the top of your receiver box. Right, make sure that seal is sitting properly and all your wires are inside the receiver box. And then you can use the provided screws. Now you can install this little cap. Looks like it's got some double-sided tape on it. So you can take this off, put the tape side down. Make sure you line up the notches in this foam with your holes, so you can see that. And this foam will help seal a little better. Push any excess wires into the receiver box. That way you don't have too many wires sitting outside and being able to catch onto anything. Now you can install this top piece with the included screws. All right, there we go. Now we can install the motor wires and the spur gear cover, and we're done. All right, the last bag, H, has a cable tie down for the motor wires and has the spur gear cover. Be careful because it does have 2 screws in the bag, and the shorter screw is what goes on the spur gear cover. And then you can install your wires. And then route your wires down. You can install a little cable holder. Install the longer screw on there. And that's it. All I gotta do is install my motor fan cooler and I'm done. All right, there's another piece of foam that you have to install. Kind of miss it at first, but just peel off the backing and you can insert it right there. And you can reinstall. All right, we're all done. Now I just got to put wheels and tires on, put the body on, battery, and we can go out for a test drive. Please like and subscribe if this video helped you out. I'll be putting up another video after this to give my impressions on how it drives with the low center of gravity chassis, so please stay tuned for that. Thanks for watching.